Hello, Dinos. Welcome to Francis Bacon and the Scientific Method. We are going to be talking about... What are we talking about? What is his thing even called? The New Scientific Method. Whoops. Francis Bacon is one of the founding fathers of scientific method. He proposed that logic and reason were the most effective way to understand the world, and that knowledge could only be understood as like this comprehension of empirical quantifiable data. And that's how the world should be understood. Yeah. I don't know about you guys, but I've never, positivism is not my bag at all. So in terms of, I figured that I should probably do one video on somebody that I really don't like. And Francis Bacon is that person for me. I mean, Matteo Ricci, I love. Pope Leo VIII, so good. Pascal, you're depressing, but I appreciate you. Francis Bacon, I don't like. Positivists are not my thing. So here we go. I hope I don't completely butcher him for you. So Francis Bacon describes existing methodology as something similar to trial and error. He says that, moreover, the works already known are due to chance and experiment rather than to sciences. So what he's saying is that the pursuit of science or the pursuit of knowledge or understanding is fundamentally flawed because, it's all been chance or hapstance or something you stumble upon. He's basically saying that we're not actually learning anything because there's no methodology in how we're pursuing knowledge with this non-methodology. Because there's no underlying cause, there's no underlying root. So he's saying there's a lack of a center to which all things are incorporated. So Bacon says, "My course and method is this: not to extract works from works or experiments from experiments as an empiric, but from works and experience to extract causes and axioms, and again from those causes and axiom, new work and experiments as a legitimate interpreter of nature." And so maybe you're sitting there thinking, man, Breton, you're sure having a strong reaction to this. That sounds like a pretty reasonable thing, extracting causes and axioms for how the universe works from empirical data. Come on, that might be nice. But to be honest, to me, this just speaks of the wildly frustrating things about the Enlightenment. I'm in law and society as a major, and in legal philosophy, there's this huge question of legitimacy. What makes a law legitimate? By what right do people control other people? By what right do people regulate other people's behavior? Where does that come from in the law? What is the legal legitimacy for that? And a contemporary of Francis Bacon was, I believe, his name was Coke. And, it's interesting because, there's just this prejudice idea that, it's not prejudice, but it's this idea that everything in the world has an underlying cause that is quantifiable and findable. And, Francis Bacon acknowledges this assumption that, there's this ordering principle that is prevalent in many other areas of society, and that it has a natural disposition to be flawed by its mere fact that it's a human construction. So in Law and Society, what we have is this guy, Edward Coke, and he's one of the original legal philosophers. And he was the guy who took the law out of being a supernatural origin, something that we inherited from God, and made it something that was based on concrete principles on earth. But by what right does he do that? I mean, yes, okay, it's a largely rational justification of where the point of origin of the law is, but we don't question this simple thing enough. Is it by where is the legitimacy of certain claims, and it's fascinating to me. It's fascinating. Okay, so where does a right to control others come from? And where does a right to deprive someone of their liberty come from? Like within the whole idea of social contract theory, everybody in a state is involved in a social contract until they break that contract, and then they're no longer part of the state. So when someone breaks the law, they technically are no longer part of the social contract. So by what right do we throw them in jail? I think it's probably a trade-off where it's like you agree to go to jail because you want to be a part of that society when you get out of jail. And that's sort of like well, you can do this. But we don't give people the option to leave the society. And it's like, I'm getting a little sidetracked because this is something that really gets under my skin about modern legal theory. So, where does the legitimacy of scientific conclusions come from? I recently did an unobtrusive ethnographic study for 45 minutes in McEwen Student Center, looking at their patrons, specifically at those who shopped at Field for Gold. Now, could my observations from that be held as legitimate? Maybe, but where I decide to draw the lines on those conclusions is really up to me. And I promise you, they should not be held as legitimate. Like, it was not a good enough methodology. And oops, sorry. It's just like, it's this idea of silo experiments and looking at things within an encased environment. You can control all the variables in. How does that explain reality where you can't control any of the variables? Maybe I'm crazy, but I just think it's ironic how with Francis Bacon and with all of this like idea of wisdom that comes from, extracting things from empirical data and then, extracting truths or axioms, it's like, what if you got it wrong somewhere along the way and people just continue to build off of those core assumptions? Like what people are discovering more and more about fat as it's an essential part of the diet and that like your brain needs it to function. It's interesting that we hold a scientific theorem correct because no one's been able to disprove it. But when people talk about God, we, with that same methodology, well, you can't disprove God. We say, oh, well, that's not legitimate because you can't prove a negative. Go fuck yourself. Ugh. So yeah, this is what I get like when I have to discuss somebody who I really don't like. I'm bad at putting aside my emotional nature and being like, oh, you ruined everything. But yeah, that's Francis Bacon, and that's Wisdom and Folly for you guys. See you on Good and Evil.